All right, Path of Exile 2's the third Edict, otherwise known as Abyssal League, otherwise known as 0.3, otherwise known as the first full league that's actually coming to the game. It's Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific, that's 4 p.m. Eastern. So let's talk about my plans, what build I'm going to be running. Hopefully, I'm not going to be baiting myself into it because it is sort of a classic style build, a fundamentally core archetype that has been slightly buffed in this patch and has some additions to the tree. So let's just kind of talk about what I'm going to be doing. Now, the build I'm going to be running is actually going to be very expensive for a number of reasons that we're going to go over, but luckily I'm going to be streaming a lot because it is going to be my first subathon for the launch of Path of Exile 2. I haven't done one since Necropolis League and PoE 1. If you don't know what subathon is, it's basically a non-stop 24/7 stream that goes on as long as you can. Obviously, you still have to sleep, etc., but that's all done on camera, and you got people that either fill in for you while you're sleeping, etc. And I have no idea how long this one's going to last. It is completely uncapped, so it will go as long as it will go, and my plan is to play like every single class, basically, or as many as I can fit in during the subathon. Last time I did this, it lasted a week, and that was with like 1,000 viewers during the Necropolis League, and I'm not exactly like the biggest PoE 1 guy or anything, so I have basically no idea how this one's going to go. Link to all that if you're interested. You're welcome to come by and say hi, or at least check in on the clown show fish tank thing that's going on. Okay, so enough yapping and intro shit. Like, what am I actually going to be playing? Well, I'm going to be playing around a core concept called Archmage. So if you don't know what Archmage actually is this guy right here. It is a persistent gem, a spirit gem, reserves 100 spirit, and what it does is it gives you damage based upon a maximum mana you have. So it currently reads 3% of damage as extra lightning damage for each 100 maximum mana you have. Non-channeling spells cost additional maximum mana, which is actually an interesting mechanic because of an item we're going to talk about in a moment. But this actually got buffed from 3% to 4%. For all intents and purposes, this is effectively a 33% buff to Archmage. And because it's extra damage as lightning, you think I'm probably going to be playing like a lightning skill. And you would be right, but you don't necessarily have to because of something new they've added. So they added here, they showed in the reveal trailer, this new nodes that go on the passive tree here. And there's one here for lightning, one here for cold, one here for fire. And this is Lightning Archon. And what this does is they each have different triggers. So Lightning Archon is spending mana, which is a good one because of, again, other reasons we're going to be talking about in a moment. But effectively what Lightning Archon does is not only give you extra damage of that type, so it gives you extra damage of lightning or fire if you're doing fire Archon, or cold if you're doing cold Archon, but it also converts your damage to lightning. And this is kind of an important point to know because the way this actually works with damage converted, I'm just going to read this here. Damage can be converted from one type to another. This causes the damage to deal a new damage type with modifiers to the new damage type and no longer scales with modifiers to the old type. For example, fire damage converted to lightning now scales with lightning damage modifiers and causes shock, but no longer scales with fire damage modifiers or causes ignite. So because Lightning Archon triggers after you spend 100% of your maximum mana, you could start casting at that point with Lightning Archon something that's not necessarily a lightning skill. I don't know how good this is actually going to be, but it will be interesting because things come to my mind like, okay, well, I could use Comet or something like that, for instance, to actually deal lightning damage. And we're going to be scaling a lot of lightning damage. And there's a lot of synergies with the whole concept of building mana for Archmage. Like, for instance, spell damage per maximum mana you have, or increased lightning damage per intelligence. And obviously you want intelligence because intelligence gives you mana, much like strength gives you life, for instance. So it ends up being a fairly simple concept if you don't know the concept of Archmage, of which you basically just stack mana and intelligence to get more mana, and you take anything that basically scales your damage off of mana or additional lightning damage. Now, another change that's I'm rather interested in here is Arc is now a projectile skill. It has the projectile tag, so straight up modifiers to projectiles will work with Arc. It also gets 50% additional shock magnitude, which is, quite a lot of shock magnitude, and that's more shock magnitude, which counteracts a bit of the downside here of the Stormweaver, which means I can do 2 shocks, but I get 25% less, so this actually kind of counteracts that downside. Though I will admit that there is a bit of confusion for me on the numbers they show here, as they say they're removing the explosions against shocked enemies, okay? But then they say the damage that they deal here is 2 to 39, scaling up to 2386. And they say previously it was 49 to 277. So, I mean, this sounds like a buff, right? But if we actually look at a level 27 arc gem, it actually says it's 82 to 462. And the 49 to 277 is in relation to the pulse damage that is actually the portion of it being removed. So the numbers that they're showing don't seem to be accurate for me, because they're saying that they're bringing up to 386, and they're removing the pulse portion of it. Well, if that was true and it is going to 386, that's actually a nerf in terms of damage to arc, and the pulse itself is the numbers that they are representing on the sheet, making it look like a buff, but pulse actually isn't part of arc anymore. So this is a little bit confusing to me on the patch notes. It's not the only change it receives. For instance, it can now consume a lightning infusion. Infusions are a new mechanic coming to the game to chain additional times and deal more damage, and we don't have the actual numbers of that. So part of me thinks that in order to balance out the 50% shock magnitude and the scaling of the scaling of the chains and the more damage from lightning infusion, they basically nerfed the basic stat of arc itself, and the 49 to 277 is a typo, or they just pulled the wrong number in order to actually see this. And quality makes it change additional times now instead of more damage for each remaining change. Now, the post portion of the damage is a pretty big part of the reason people would use arc to begin with. So this could arguably not be very good, but now that it has some additional features like being a projectile, having more shock, having additional chains and more damage, I don't know the numbers on this, then I'm kind of curious just to try it literally anyway. And plus, arc, mana stacking with arc was like the first build I played in PoE 1 that kind of just picked my way through the tree and just figured it out using the new Arc of Surging ability, and I got lucky and ended up being quite good in the game, because it was bug bound. I talk about that, and it was the first time I was able to clear, like in standard, obviously, all of the Ubers and everything in PoE 1. So I called it the Palpatine build, and it was really just a fun build for me, both thematically, but also an enjoyable, like memorable playthrough of the original Path of Exile for me. So for this reason, I want to sort of relive that experience and go through and pick everything that's mana, everything that's intelligence, everything that's lightning, and do a very simple Palpatine, unlimited power, as much lightning as I can possibly shoot out theme build. Now, there are a couple additional items that I think might make this quite interesting. The obvious one that would come to anyone's mind at this point would, of course, be this guy right here. Hits with supported skills treat enemy monster elemental values as inverted. And because this came up on the live stream and people weren't familiar with what inverted means, it means if the mob has 50% resistance and you hit them, it's treated as if it has negative 50% resistances instead. If they have 75%, it would be treating it like negative 75. For instance, bosses would be the ones with 75%. And how that actually calcs out is 600, saying they have 75%, let's say a boss, 600% more damage, otherwise known as 7 times the damage. So let's just say if you were going to do 1,000 base damage and they had 75%, normally you would do 250 damage because that's how the resistance works. But because of this, instead of actually removing the base damage of 1,000 down to 250, you're actually gaining that 750 difference back as additional damage, which goes to 1,750 as opposed to 250. Obviously, these numbers are wild. I'm surprised this one is being added to the game, and this is why I'm saying this build could be actually fairly expensive, primarily because of this. There's some other items which we'll see how good they're going to be. I don't think this is going to be a very popular build. It could very well be bait, but this item alone will be very expensive. Another interesting item I want to see how this works is Indigon. So this does increased cost of skills for each total mana spent recently and increased spell damage for each total mana you have spent recently. So this basically ramps the cost of your skills more and more and more and more until you basically can't spend enough mana in order to keep it up, and then increase spell damage each time you're spending more mana. So it has like an obvious synergy with itself here. Now, before, this isn't really something people cared about. I mean, the cost of mana is already like kind of crazy high, to be honest, but that's supposed to be like somewhat resolved coming into 0.3. We'll see how true that actually is when we get on the class. But more notably, I want to be playing the Stormweaver, and how the Stormweaver works is they've actually added some changes here. So the Force of Will notable passive no longer grants 1% increased effect of Arcane Surge per 25 maximum mana. Instead, it now grants 20% of damage taken from mana before life. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And 20% increased magnitude of the Arcane Surge per 10% missing mana. If you don't know what Arcane Surge is Arcane Surge is a buff that gives you 10% more cast speed and 20% more mana regen. Well, actually, it used to give you 10% more cast speed because now it actually does something different. It gives you 15% increased cast speed instead of 10% more cast speed. So they're actually moving this to increase instead of more. Better when you have absolutely no cast speed, gets worse the later on your build is actually going to go. But we're more interested in the 20% more mana regen. Now, if you remember that Indigon helmet I was telling you about where it costs more and more and more, it's pretty hard to use with the cost of skills already being high, but also because a lot of times if you're stacking mana, you're using something called Mind Over Matter. And what Mind Over Matter does is it basically takes mana before your life. That way your health pool is effectively your mana pool, okay? And that's kind of where your total life pool comes because you're investing so many stats into intelligence, etc. This also has the negative side of 50% less mana recovery rate. But because of the new changes to Stormweaver, remember I said you get 20% of damage taken from mana before life, then you're actually able to basically eventually get Mind Over Matter without actually having to spec into it and getting the 50% less mana recovery rate negative penalty. We get the 20% for free, but then also there are some nodes on the tree that take damage from mana before life, for instance, so you can spec into this on the tree to get a portion of it. But there's also this rune here, which body armors 10% of damage is taken from mana before life. And because there's the ability to get the additional socket now as a drop on pieces of gear, uniques included, which is important because of a reason we're about to mention, you can actually go up to 4 sockets, meaning you could get 40% of damage is taken from mana before life just from the runes themselves. Granted, these are greater runes, and again, it's going to be another additional cost. Again, we get back to like, I think this is going to be expensive to get onto the higher end of this build. But there is also this, which is the Cloak of Defiance, 30% of damage taken from mana before life. So you can actually straight up get another 30%. So just by wearing this, even without the sockets, and you're playing Stormweaver, you're getting 50% and you're splitting the damage between your life and mana pool already without having to worry about any of the sockets or any of the passive tree points yet. So if you have this one triple socketed, that's 80%. If you happen to get lucky and get the quad socket, for instance, then you're talking 90%. You take it on the tree, Bob's your uncle, and you're pretty much done with 100% at that point. But that's not all. There's also the new belt that can have it where it counts as those socketed items from any of the other pieces and can have an increased effect of socketed items once again. So, I mean, you could pretty easily get, another 30+%, 40% on the higher end, more of damage taken from if you get one of these that's this body armor. This is a new item coming to the game in 0.3. So your life becomes mana, your damage is scaling off how much life you actually have, you're doing lightning damage, and then you can also convert things from other elements to lightning damage through the new Lightning Archon, and you're scaling based upon how much mana you're spending on the abilities itself. That's the concept. Now, there's some downsides to this. In the video, it looks like the Archon itself only lasts 15 seconds, and I don't know if that actually means that it's going to, after the 15 seconds, then you have to spend another 100% to get 15 seconds again, or if I can constantly refresh it by spending another 100%. We just don't have that info yet. So Lightning Archon, when it comes to the conversion, could, just be basically not good and you're stuck with lightning skills anyway. And the new passive tree could just not have enough plus mana on it. I might not be able to stack enough mana for it actually to matter to feel like I have a good enough health pool. Or using Indigon could still just ramp the cost too high to actually be effective for the damage increase. These are the concerns with the build I have, but I'm going to try it anyway. One thing's for sure, I'll have all the time in the world to be able to try to get the build to work because we are doing the subathon. It is, a million bajillion hours. I don't know how long this is going to go. Like I said, the last one was 7 days locked in the room. So I'm going to have plenty of time to farm the currency I need, and I am playing trade because of the new additions to the trade. I'll have all the time in the world to try to farm the gear and see exactly what it's like. There is one very crystal clear thing, however. It doesn't really matter what you play if you have this. If you have any amount of damage, this thing actually gives you just crazy. This is a very strong item. So if you can get your hands on this, this is like a Giga Crutch, which you can kind of make a lot of builds you want just work. And by this thing existing, I think I'm still going to be able to do damage if I actually have this thing. Whether or not it's a good archetype build and the theme of it is actually super great this league, who knows? We're going to find out. But if I have this, I'm sure it's not going to be able to kill things, or at least that's my copium. Anyway, that's it. I'll be live as of the posting of this video. That's my plans for it. I'll see you during the live streams, and that's going to be a ton of those, and we'll find out together exactly how this is before we go working on the next class. Cheers.